course, is just a conjugate vortex. In other words, it is the three-dimensional nature of the expansive vector of the loss of energy or inertia of the dielectric. We could say of counter space, we could say of the ether. Anyway, I like to apply that to the vortex of existence, and just think about that a second. The essential parts of a circle, of course, are a radius and a circumference, and of course the center. And of course, if the radius extrapolates out the toroidal geometry, the center, of course, would be lux, or light. The radius or ray would be lumen, which of course in English would be illumination. But these are not two things, these are one thing. And this is how we end up with a three-dimensional conjugate vortex that we call conventionally the torus, because the three-dimensional force vector of extrinsic application, and of course the Greeks called this the euristos, they also too called it ananake, would be the manifestation. But the manifestation in simple, at the very most simple, is the geometry of the torus, which is just a conjugate vortex. So yeah, the radius would be the lumen, the circumference would be color, manifestation, phenomena. That's the stuff that actually dazzles humanity, of course. We're interested not in the center, not in the return, which of course is a definition of transmigration, the definition of ignorance, that we're fascinated with not the power that drives the Ferris wheel. In the case of a child, a Ferris wheel with all the horses that are going up and down. This is what fascinates the children. If one were to have true wisdom, one would see at the dead center where you cannot see, conventionally cannot see, from anywhere outside the Ferris wheel, the thing that is powering all of it. We're fascinated by phenomena, fascinated by the puppet show, but we need to be fascinated by the energy that drives all of it. So the circumference would be color or phenomena, and what is outside the circumference, of course, is darkness. But we could get into another video and write an entire book about what darkness is, which is not a thing itself, rather a privation. Of course, darkness is only defined by gross matter, which of course blocks illumination, because everything is capacitance, resistance, permeability, and permittivity. That which blocks light is the manifestation of matter. Matter is not evil. I mean, the Gnostics, one of the fundamental failures of Gnosticism is it sees matter as evil. Well, it's not. It does block the light to both light and form, but matter itself is not evil. Evil is the desire and the clinging towards it, specifically excessius. All forms of ancient metaphysics say the same thing, that evil is excess, and excess is evil. This is actually how, there's not another video or article out there in the entire world about this fact, and it is divinely simple if you understand metaphysical symbolism, or the idea of some numbers are, of course, words. So 666, if you actually say it in Greek, is excessius. In Latin, it's almost identical, it's excessius. And it's nearly the same in English, which is excess. Evil is excess. Excess is evil. I tell you right now, every form of ancient metaphysics, monistic metaphysics, the true Indian, Greek, Egyptian, Platonic, Neoplatonic, Pythagorean, evil is excess. Excess is not a thing in itself. Excess is an impulse towards excess, because it constantly has to be fed, and it can never be fulfilled, like a bottomless pit. There's two bottomless pits. We think in terms of a vortex, like, at the nature of natura naturans, the vortex which leads to counter space, where the plane of inertia is a bottomless pit. But that's entropy towards the one. The other bottomless pit, the true bottomless pit, which is not actually the other bottomless pit, is the impulse towards excess. That is leaping off the torus towards the literal darkness, forms and phenomena. So there are two pits. One is towards fulfillment, transcendence, and liberation, and the other pit is evil. The impetus towards excess, or excessius, which is a number, by the way. People say, oh, it's the number of the beast. Actually, it says number of man. It says excess. The word, literally, and you can look this up too. Don't take my word for it. There are several ancient Greek and Egyptian words and numbers, say 1,000. I'm not using that as an example. Complex numbers with 2 or 3 or more digits, usually 2 to 4 digits, which are a word. When you actually say the number, you're actually saying a word. So when you say excessius, In the Greek, you're saying 666. It just means excess. But instead of writing exicius, you just write a number. This, by the way, folks, is called metaphysical symbolism. And I've not seen a book or an article or a video or anybody else has seen the blatant obviousness of that. So is it my discovery? Yes, it is. And it is also, too, undeniable and hyper-rational and logical. Anyway, getting back to the conjugate vortex of existence here. If there are many concentric circles, each circumference represents a level of reference of the world, i.e. a locus of composibles. You need to look that word up if you're not familiar with it. It's called composibles. Also, in any world, the center corresponds to the sun, of course, area to atmosphere, circumference to Earth. Further, the vertical rays will be male to the horizontal circumference, which is conventionally female, and this male-female conjugate, which is not a duality, but conjugate system, just as the dielectric and the magnetic. We have a conjugate system throughout the entire universe. The position of the individual existing in time and space will always be at a radius that meets the circumference. Motion along the circumference will be temporal, while centrifugal or centripetal, meaning up or down motion, will be atemporal. Atemporal, meaning the inverse of time. Because time is not a thing. Time is a measure of mass and magnitude. There's no such thing against this insanity. Ideas of what he called the fuzzy-haired crackpot, i.e. Einstein. The notion that you could bend unicorn farts. He didn't say unicorn farts, that's mine. Regarding space and time, because space has no properties and time is only a measure, so this notion of warp space-time vis-a-vis relativity is insane. It doesn't follow natural law. It is irrational and untenable. Genuine progress, spiritual progress from the point of view of the individual or existence. Existence literally means to be outside of yourself, by the way. Existence or existence, if you think about it, and it does mean it literally, it means to be outside of yourself. This is one rare instance in English where the word is a true metaphysical meaning. This is what is hard for me to convey to people in the Greek and the Pali order. These words are not just words like vijnana in Pali means consciousness. Okay, well, so what? Well, the word vijnana is a composite of vi, which means opposite to, inverse of jnana or gnosis. So the word for consciousness, hyper-rationally in the metaphysical, also means ignorance or agnosis. Ignorance is consciousness, consciousness is ignorance. So this word has a duplicity of depth, just as exicius does. And I can't believe nobody's seen that. Of all these Christian mystics and all these other people that have read the Bible like a million times and are experts in these various languages, I can't believe none of them have seen that for the past 2,000 plus years. I kind of find that quite fascinating. Fascinating in that it's incredibly unintelligent. Anyway, spiritual progress from the point of view of the individual becomes a resultant of both motions, horizontal and vertical, which of course will be a spiral. The symbol, of course, of the double spiral, i.e. the conjugate vortex of the torus, represents a whole process of descent and ascent from the center. We're talking about the null point, the plane of inertia, whose center is nowhere. It has no Cartesian value. This is the manifestation. Because human bodies are exactly that way. Everything that we experience and birth and everything is through orifices in the body. You know, the black spots of the eye, the ears, nose, mouth, the other places that we won't mention, of course. So this double spiral represents the whole process of ascent and descent from and towards the center. The purely materialistic concept of progress, or spiritual progress, however, will be represented only by motion along the circumference. And away from the circumference, as I actually should add. Forgot to write here. While on the other hand, centripetal motion would be considered to be sudden, having precisely the well-known instantaneous or spontaneity of illumination. You can either spiral towards the center or you could fall directly into it. And that, of course, depends on one's spiritual proclivity of understanding whether it be spontaneous or... And this, of course, was a debate amongst the Chinese and the Mahayanists and others, whether illumination is spontaneous or whether it's gradual. And the answer is both. It could be one or the other, or both at the same time. And this is why liberation is atemporal. Falling towards the center is the complete opposite of time. Centrifugal motion is temporal. It is a motion towards mass and magnitude. Everything that we understand about the universe must be divinely simple. It doesn't have to be simplex and hard to explain, which of course it is hard to explain, because human beings don't have the mentality. They're never brought up to think like this. Their brains have never been in that weird gear. I can't drive a manual. Sure. I know there's that gear that basically people never go to. Yes, there are in some vehicles. It's just a gear in people's minds that's never been exercised. Use it or lose it. Muscles are not used, they atrophy. And that muscle has really never been used by anybody. Almost nobody. Exists for you to expand upon, and it makes life, so much more awesome. I mean, my life, existentially sucks because I'm always struggling to pay the bills and all the other nonsense, pain, misery, suffering, taxes, all of that stuff is unchanged. It becomes wonderful on a transcendent level, such that you're able to see clearly what's going on around you, and especially in nature. Most people walk by nature, they never look at it. And even if you look at it, you see it, but you don't see it. And people say, why are you so interested in metaphysics? It doesn't make you any money. It doesn't pay the bills. And all of this is true. There are things that are transcendent to this existential world, which of course are superior. Those are the things to be sought, which make life better. You can't put a price on, say, your children and your wife, for example, which I don't have. But it's the most rewarding thing in people's lives. The things that have turned this entire world cannot be bought. They can't be handled. That's why I love materialists. It's like, the entire world has been built upon things that you can't put under a microscope. You can't feel it or touch it. Things like hope, fear, love, hate, anger, desire. All of these things have built up the entire world. They're responsible for 99.999% of inventions. They're literally the oil and the gears that drive the entire world. And yet these materialists only believe in things that you can stick under a microscope and stick in your hand and palpate. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, what a myopic, unintelligent, insipid, pathetic, false view upon the reality of natura naturans. Anyway, if you could think about that and what a vortex actually is, because a torus is nothing other than a conjugate vortex, and magnetism's geometry is the torus. It's a three-dimensional force vector away from the ether, counter space, or subspace. Whatever word you want to use doesn't make any difference. Nature doesn't care. Mother Nature, you say. Not that Mother Nature is an actual person. Keep saying Mother Nature, like there's this hairy armpit chick out there, And it's just for sake of humorous analogy, I refer to Mother Nature as, the muddy-footed chick wearing a hemp skirt. But nature must necessitatively, there's that word again, ananke. But ananke doesn't really mean a necessity. I've got a whole book, 354 pages long, attempting to explain ananke, and it never accomplishes. Ananke just means this: it can't be any other way. It is this in most simplex and divine. It can't exist any other way. Anything else would be complex and contrived and necessitate some sort of divine creature up in the clouds with a beard, all the other really hooey, that people are always espousing. Well, I believe. It's like, I don't care what you believe. Let's get the facts.